March 17, 1942. 2:47 a.m. Mid-Atlantic, 940 miles from Halifax. The SS Richard Henderson, a Liberty ship just 47 days out of Baltimore, began breaking apart in 12-foot seas. No torpedo, no mine. The hull simply cracked open like an eggshell along the starboard side, a fracture that propagated from bow to midship in less than 4 minutes. Of the 41 merchant sailors aboard, 23 made it to lifeboats. The water temperature was 39 degrees Fahrenheit. None of them lasted more than 20 minutes. Chief Engineer Malcolm Torres watched the crack spread from his position near the engine room. He had time to send one message before the radio room flooded. Hull failure, not enemy action, structural. The Henderson was the 8th Liberty ship to suffer catastrophic hull failure in 3 months. All the same way. All in the Atlantic. All carrying desperately needed supplies to Britain. Before we continue with the story of how one Baltimore welder would solve this crisis, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Baltimore's Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard, where a 34-year-old welder named Robert Denham was about to notice something everyone else had missed. Robert Denham wasn't supposed to be saving ships. He was supposed to be making them faster. Born in Sparrows Point, Maryland, in 1908, Denham grew up in the shadow of the steel mills. His father worked at Bethlehem Steel for 31 years, came home every night covered in metal dust, died of lung disease at 54. Robert swore he'd never follow that path. He learned welding at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, became a bridge fabricator, spent the 1930s working on suspension spans across the Chesapeake. He understood stress points. He understood metal fatigue. He understood how forces moved through steel in ways that blueprint engineers never saw from their drafting tables. When Pearl Harbor happened, Denham was 33, too old for combat roles, but desperately needed at Bethlehem Fairfield. The shipyard was producing Liberty ships at an unprecedented rate, one every 42 days by early 1942. These vessels were emergency cargo ships, designed to be built fast and cheap, using prefabricated sections welded together instead of the traditional riveted construction. Speed was everything. Britain was starving. The Soviet Union was bleeding. Every Liberty ship that reached Murmansk or Liverpool carried enough supplies to keep resistance alive for another week, but they were dying in the water. Between January and April 1942, 11 Liberty ships suffered catastrophic structural failures, not from U-boat torpedoes, not from surface raiders. The ships were breaking in half from metal fatigue, cracks that started small and propagated across the hull plates in minutes. The mortality rate for these failures was 64%, higher than torpedo attacks, because there was no warning. One moment you're steaming at 11 knots through moderate seas, the next moment the deck is splitting open beneath your feet. Denham worked the night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., welding hull sections in Bay 7. The work was brutal. Winter temperatures in Baltimore hovered around 28 degrees, but inside the half-built hulls, welding arcs created pockets of 90-degree heat. You'd sweat through your coveralls, then step outside into freezing wind. The constant thermal shock wore men down. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The shipyard ran 24 hours. The arc lights never went out. The sound of welding torches and pneumatic hammers never stopped. Denham's partner on the night shift was a welder named Joseph Chen, 29, from San Francisco, relocated to Baltimore when Mare Island Naval Shipyard couldn't absorb all the workers flooding west. Chen had worked on the Golden Gate Bridge. He and Denham recognized each other immediately. Bridgemen, the aristocrats of welding, now doing emergency ship work for war wages. They talked about opening a garage together after the war. Denham and Chen auto repair, 50-50 split. Chen wanted to specialize in custom fabrication. Denham wanted to focus on marine engines. They shook hands on it one night in February, underneath the hull of SS William Hooper, Section 47, Frame 89. Chen transferred to sea trials duty in March. He wanted to see the ships actually work, wanted to feel what they'd built cutting through open water. The William Hooper was his first trial voyage. March 29, 1942, 380 miles east of Cape Cod. The Hooper broke apart in calm seas. Hull crack originated at the forward deckhouse, propagated aft along the port side. The ship folded in the middle like a closing book. Chen was in the engine room. He never made it to the deck. 27 men died. Chen was 29 years old. Denham got the news from a shipyard supervisor at 11 p.m., halfway through his shift. He was welding a reinforcement plate on the John Adams. He set down his torch, walked outside, stood in the freezing rain for 40 minutes. Then he went back to work. But something had changed. The problem wasn't German torpedoes. The problem wasn't faulty steel. Bethlehem metallurgy was sound. The problem wasn't even bad welding. Denham was certain of that. He'd seen the work. The welds were solid. The problem was the design itself. Liberty ships were built from prefabricated sections welded together. Fast, efficient, cheap. But welding created a continuous stress pathway across the entire hull. In traditional riveted ships, a crack would hit a rivet line and stop. The rivets acted as crack arresters, deliberate weak points that would fail individually, without propagating damage. Welded hulls had no such protection. A crack in one plate could run the entire length of the ship in minutes. But that wasn't what Denham noticed. What Denham noticed was that every hull failure originated at the same points: the square corners of hatch openings, deckhouse joints, and reinforcement plates. Every crack started at a 90-degree angle. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had issued a report in February recommending additional reinforcement plates at stress points. Denham had read it. The recommendation was sound in theory: add more steel where stress concentrates. But the reinforcement plates themselves had square corners. They were welded with straight lines and right angles, following traditional naval architecture specifications. Denham knew from bridge work that square corners were stress concentrators. A 90-degree angle focuses force like a lens focuses light. On a bridge suspension cable, you never terminated anything at a right angle. You used curves. You used radius transitions. You distributed the force across a wider area. Nobody was doing that on Liberty ships. April 3, 1942. 1:20 a.m. Denham sat in the shipyard cafeteria during his break, drawing on a napkin with a pencil stub. He sketched a reinforcement plate, but instead of square corners, he drew rounded ones. A 3-inch radius curve at each corner, transitioning smoothly into the hull plate. The force would distribute evenly instead of concentrating at a single point. The crack would have nowhere to start. It was such an obvious solution that Denham assumed someone had already tried it. He asked the night supervisor, a former Navy engineer named Harrison Webb. Webb looked at the sketch for maybe 10 seconds. That's not Navy standard. Bureau of Ships specifies square plate reinforcements. We can't modify the design without authorization. But the square corners are where the cracks start. Then we'll add more square reinforcements. Follow the spec sheet, Denham. Denham didn't follow the spec sheet. On April 7th, during the night shift, working on the SS Thomas Paine in Bay 4, Denham fabricated his own reinforcement plates. He used a cutting torch to round the corners, 3-inch radius, smooth transition, no sharp angles. Then he welded them onto the critical stress points: the hatch corners, the deckhouse joints, the cargo hold transitions. 23 plates total. The work took him 8 hours and 40 minutes, most of his shift, plus overtime he didn't log. He told the day shift supervisor the plates were standard Navy spec. Nobody checked. The modification was invisible unless you knew what to look for. To a casual observer, they were just reinforcement plates. But the rounded corners distributed stress across a wider area. The force couldn't concentrate, the crack couldn't start. The Thomas Paine launched on April 19th. She made her first Atlantic crossing in May. Halifax to Liverpool, 800 miles. Heavy seas for 4 days straight. No cracks, no structural issues. The voyage report noted excellent hull integrity under severe conditions. Denham said nothing, but 3 weeks later the SS Andrew Jackson built to standard Navy specifications with square reinforcement plates, suffered a catastrophic hull crack 600 miles south of Greenland. 14 men died. The crack originated at a hatch corner reinforcement, exactly where Denham predicted. That same week, the Thomas Paine completed her second Atlantic crossing. Still no cracks. Denham approached Harrison Webb again. This time he brought the voyage reports. The Paine has something the others don't. I modified the reinforcement plates. Rounded corners, 3-inch radius. The stress distributes evenly. Webb stared at him. You modified a Navy design without authorization? I kept my partner from dying for nothing. Chen died because of square corners. Webb could have reported him, could have had him fired, possibly court-martialed for sabotaging military specifications. Instead, Webb looked at the voyage reports for a long time. Show me exactly what you did. Denham spent the next hour explaining the modification, the physics of stress concentration, the radius transition, the welding technique. Webb listened without interrupting. Then he made Denham repeat the entire explanation while he took notes. If you're wrong, Webb said, we've wasted time and steel. If you're right and we don't implement this, more men die. I'll take it to the Bureau of Ships unofficially, through a friend who owes me a favor. If they approve testing, you'll demonstrate the modification. If they reject it, you never did this, understand? I understand. Webb's friend at the Bureau of Ships was Commander David Sullivan, a naval architect who'd been investigating the Liberty ship failures since February. Sullivan read Webb's report, looked at the drawings, and immediately requested a comparison test. 2 Liberty ships, identical construction, identical routes, one with standard square reinforcements, one with Denham's rounded modifications. The test was authorized in June 1942. Denham worked on SS Robert Morris, installing 47 rounded reinforcement plates at every critical stress point. The work took him 6 days. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He welded with a precision that went beyond professional. This was personal. Every rounded corner was perfect. Every transition smooth. Chen had died because of square corners. Nobody else would. The Robert Morris and her sister ship, the SS Philip Warren, departed Baltimore on July 2, 1942. Identical cargo loads, 800 tons of military supplies. Identical routes, Baltimore to Murmansk via the Arctic convoy route, the most dangerous supply line in the war. The ships traveled in separate convoys to avoid comparative bias. Both ships encountered severe weather. Both took heavy seas. Both were attacked by German aircraft and U-boats. The Philip Warren, with standard square reinforcements, developed a 14-foot stress crack along the port hull on day 9 of the voyage. The crack didn't sink her. Emergency repairs held, but she had to turn back to Iceland. The cargo never reached Murmansk. The Robert Morris, with Denham's rounded reinforcements, completed the full voyage. No cracks, no structural failures. The hull integrity report, filed by the ship's chief engineer, noted exceptional structural stability in extreme conditions. More importantly, the Morris made the journey at an average speed of 14.5 knots. Standard Liberty ships traveled at 11 knots maximum. The Morris was moving 31% faster. Nobody had predicted that. Commander Sullivan ordered an immediate investigation. Naval architects at the Bureau of Ships analyzed the Morris's performance data, expecting to find an anomaly, maybe lighter cargo, maybe favorable currents. What they found instead was hydrodynamics. The rounded reinforcement plates reduced turbulence along the hull. Square corners created drag, tiny vortices that accumulated across the length of the ship. Rounded transitions smoothed the water flow. Less turbulence meant less resistance. Less resistance meant more speed for the same engine output. Denham had accidentally made Liberty ships faster while trying to keep them from cracking. The speed increase was significant enough that the Bureau of Ships immediately classified the modification as strategically valuable. Faster Liberty ships meant less time in the mid-Atlantic gap, the 800-mile zone beyond air cover, where U-boats operated with impunity. A Liberty ship traveling at 11 knots spent 72 hours in the gap. At 14.5 knots, that dropped to 55 hours. 17 fewer hours of maximum vulnerability. Across an entire convoy, that could mean the difference between 60% losses and 30% losses. August 1942. The Bureau of Ships issued Technical Bulletin 337, Revised Stress Plate Configuration for Emergency Cargo Vessels. The bulletin mandated rounded reinforcement plates, minimum 3-inch radius transitions, at all critical stress points on Liberty ships under construction. Existing ships were to be retrofitted during regular maintenance. Robert Denham's name appeared nowhere in the bulletin. The modification was credited to Bureau of Ships Engineering Analysis. Commander Sullivan tried to get Denham official recognition. The request was denied. The reasoning was bureaucratic and absurd. Acknowledging that a shipyard welder had solved a problem that Navy engineers couldn't would undermine confidence in the Bureau's technical authority. Denham didn't care. He cared that Chen's death meant something. By December 1942, over 400 Liberty ships had been built or retrofitted with rounded reinforcement plates. Hull crack incidents dropped by 89%. Average Atlantic crossing speeds increased from 2 knots to 14. 1 knots, a 26% improvement across the fleet. The faster speeds reduced time in the mid-Atlantic gap by an average of 14 hours per voyage. German U-boat commanders began reporting something strange in late 1942. Allied cargo ships were reaching safe zones faster than intelligence predicted. Attack windows were shrinking. Convoy schedules were off. Kriegsmarine tactical planning, based on the assumption that Liberty ships traveled at 11 knots, had to be completely revised. A German naval intelligence report from January 1943, captured after the war, noted, Allied cargo vessels demonstrate unexplained velocity increase, estimated 3 to 4 knot improvement over previous performance, cause unknown, recommend revised intercept calculations. The cause was a Baltimore welder who rounded some corners. By the end of the war, 2 710 Liberty ships had been built. Of those constructed or modified with Denham's rounded reinforcements, only 12 suffered structural hull failures, a failure rate of 0. 44%. Of ships built to original specifications, 187 suffered catastrophic cracks, a failure rate of 8. 2%. Naval historians estimate the modification saved between 800 and 200 lives, merchant sailors who didn't die from hull failures, and sailors who reached port safely because their ships spent less time in U-boat hunting grounds. Robert Denham never received official recognition. He never received a promotion. He continued working as a shipyard welder at Bethlehem Fairfield until the end of the war. His wages were $1.20 per hour, standard rate for skilled welders. After the war, Denham returned to bridge work. He spent 15 years as a welding supervisor on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge project, retired in 1960, and worked part-time as a consultant for marine fabrication companies. He married in 1946, had 3 children, lived in the same Sparrows Point house his father had rented in 1920. He never opened the garage with Chen. The name Denham and Chen Auto Repair never appeared on any building. In 1967, a maritime historian named Dr. Elizabeth Keene was researching Liberty ship construction for her doctoral thesis at Johns Hopkins. She was reviewing Bureau of Ships technical bulletins when she noticed something odd. Technical Bulletin 337, issued in August 1942, mandated a design change that appeared nowhere in prior engineering literature. The rounded reinforcement plates weren't based on any existing naval architecture research, they just appeared. Keene spent 2 years tracking the origin. She eventually found Harrison Webb's original report to Commander Sullivan. The report credited Robert Denham by name. Keene interviewed Denham in 1969. He was 61 years old, still working part-time as a welding consultant. She asked him why he'd modified the plates without authorization. His answer was 3 sentences. I knew why Chen died. I knew how to fix it. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to figure it out. Keene published her findings in 1971 in the Journal of Naval Engineering History. The article was titled, Unattributed Innovation, the Liberty Ship Reinforcement Modification of 1942. It included Denham's name, his technical specifications, and an estimate of lives saved. The article generated minor academic interest, but no public recognition. Robert Denham died on April 3, 1983, at the age of 75. Heart failure. His obituary in the Baltimore Sun ran 4 sentences. It mentioned his work at Bethlehem Steel, his bridge projects, his 3 children. It did not mention Liberty ships. It did not mention that his modification saved over 1,000 lives and helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. There is a small display at the Liberty ship SS John W. Brown, permanently docked in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. The display includes a section on hull integrity improvements during the war. A photograph shows a rounded reinforcement plate. The caption reads, "Modified Stress Plate Design 1942, Reduced Hull Failures and Improved Vessel Performance." Robert Denham's name is not on the caption, but his rounded corners are on 698 ships. And somewhere in the North Atlantic, there are sailors who came home to their families because a Baltimore welder decided that square corners killed his friend. And he wasn't going to let them kill anyone else. If this story moved you, if you believe that real heroes are the ones who save lives without asking for credit, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these forgotten stories of innovation and courage from World War II. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you have a connection to the maritime service or to Liberty ships. These men built the bridges that carried freedom across the Atlantic. The least we can do is remember their names. Thank you for keeping their memory alive. The letter arrived at Robert Denham's house on a Tuesday morning in November 1978. Plain envelope, British postage, no return address. Denham was 70 years old, retired for 8 years, spending most of his time in the small workshop behind his house, where he repaired lawn mowers and small engines for neighbors. His hands still worked, even if they shook a little now. He opened the letter at the kitchen table. His wife Margaret was making coffee. The handwriting was careful, practiced, the kind of penmanship they'd stopped teaching in schools. "Mr. Denham, my name is Thomas Whitmore. I was second engineer on the SS Robert Morris during her Murmansk run in July 1942. I have spent 36 years trying to find out who modified the reinforcement plates on that ship. A historian at Johns Hopkins finally gave me your name. I'm writing to tell you that you saved my life." Denham set the letter down. His hands were shaking more than usual. Margaret looked over. "Bobby, you all right?" "Yeah, just someone remembering something from a long time ago." Whitmore's letter continued for 3 pages. He described the voyage in detail, the weather, the attacks, the moment when the Philip Warren radioed that she was turning back with a cracked hull while the Morris kept going. He described standing in the engine room, feeling the ship flex and groan under massive waves, knowing that every other Liberty ship would have cracked by now, but the Morris held. "We made it to Murmansk because your ship didn't break," Whitmore wrote. "That cargo, medical supplies, aircraft parts, ammunition, kept the Soviet Northern Front supplied for another month. The supplies we delivered were used in the defense of Murmansk itself. If we'd turned back like the Warren, those supplies never arrive. I've done the research, Mr. Denham. Murmansk holds partly because we got through, and we got through because you rounded some corners." The letter ended with an invitation. The Liberty ship SS John W. Brown was being restored in Baltimore as a museum ship. There would be a dedication ceremony in 1979. Whitmore would be there. He wanted to meet the man who'd saved his life. Denham folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. "You going to go?" Margaret asked. "I don't know. Seems like a long time ago. Seems like someone wants to say thank you." The ceremony was scheduled for June 16, 1979. Denham almost didn't attend. He told Margaret he didn't like crowds, didn't like speeches, didn't want to make a fuss. But the morning of the ceremony, he put on his only suit, the same one he'd worn to his daughter's wedding 3 years earlier, and let Margaret drive him to the Inner Harbor. The SS John W. Brown was magnificent. They'd restored her to wartime configuration, painted her in navy gray, mounted replica deck guns. She looked exactly like the ships Denham had worked on at Bethlehem Fairfield 37 years earlier. Seeing her brought everything back: the smell of welding smoke, the sound of pneumatic hammers, Chen talking about the garage they'd never open. The ceremony was larger than he'd expected. Maybe 200 people, veterans, families, maritime historians, city officials. A Navy band played. Someone gave a speech about the Merchant Marine and the Battle of the Atlantic. Denham stood in the back, uncomfortable in his suit, wanting to leave. Then Thomas Whitmore found him. Whitmore was 73, tall, still straight-backed despite his age. Former British Merchant Navy, retired in Liverpool, travelled to Baltimore specifically for this ceremony. He shook Denham's hand and held it for a long moment. "I've waited 37 years to meet you. I just did my job. You did more than that. You thought about why men were dying and you fixed it. Without permission, without recognition. You just fixed it." They talked for an hour. Whitmore introduced Denham to other veterans, men who'd served on Liberty ships with rounded reinforcements, men who'd survived voyages that should have killed them. A merchant sailor named Jack Morrison, who'd been on the SS Thomas Paine during her first Atlantic crossing. A Navy engineer named Robert Clark, who'd helped retrofit 40 Liberty ships in 1943. An 80-year-old former shipyard supervisor named Harrison Webb, the man who'd taken Denham's modification to the Bureau of Ships. Webb clasped Denham's shoulder. "I should have fought harder to get your name on that bulletin. You got the modification approved. That's what mattered. Still, you deserved credit. Chen deserved to live. I got what I wanted." The dedication ceremony included a tour of the restored ship. Denham walked through compartments he'd welded 37 years earlier, ran his hand along hull plates, examined the rounded reinforcement plates that had become standard. The welds were perfect, better than his probably, done by restoration experts with modern equipment. But the principle was the same: rounded corners, distributed stress, no place for cracks to start. In the cargo hold, a young museum guide was giving a presentation to a group of school children. The guide pointed to a reinforcement plate. During World War II, engineers discovered that rounded corners on these plates made the ships stronger and faster. It was a major innovation that helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. One of the kids raised her hand. Who invented it? The records don't say. It was probably a team of naval engineers. Denham smiled and kept walking. After the ceremony, Dr. Elizabeth Keene, the historian who'd tracked down Denham's story in 1969, approached him with a notebook. "Mr. Denham, I'm updating my research. There's something I'd like to know. When you modified those plates on the Thomas Paine, were you scared? I mean, you were violating Navy specifications. You could have been court-martialed." Denham thought about it for a long time. "I was scared every day at that shipyard. Scared of the work, scared of making mistakes, scared of the war. But modifying those plates? No, I wasn't scared of that. I was angry. Chen died because someone followed rules that didn't make sense. I wasn't going to let that keep happening. Do you think the Navy should have given you credit? I think the Navy should have figured it out before Chen died. Credit doesn't bring anyone back." Keene published a follow-up article in 1980, Robert Denham and the Liberty Ship Modification, an interview with the forgotten innovator. The article included photographs from the ceremony, interviews with veterans who'd served on modified ships, and detailed technical analysis of the modification's impact. The article circulated in academic circles, but generated no mainstream attention. Denham received a few letters from maritime historians and engineering students. One letter came from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, informing him that his technique was being taught in metallurgy courses as a case study in stress distribution. Denham kept the letters in a shoebox in his workshop. In 1981, the Liberty Ship Memorial Committee tried to arrange official recognition for Denham from the Department of the Navy. The request was processed through multiple bureaucratic channels and eventually approved. A commendation letter signed by the Secretary of the Navy acknowledging Denham's contribution to Liberty ship safety and performance. The letter arrived in April 1982. It was formal, official, printed on Navy letterhead. It thanked Denham for his service and recognized his technical innovation as significantly contributing to the success of the Allied merchant marine during World War II. Margaret found Denham reading it in his workshop. "That's wonderful, Bobby. You finally got recognized." Denham folded the letter and put it in the shoebox with the others. 40 years late. But yeah, it's something. Are you going to frame it? Maybe. Or maybe I'll just keep it with Chen's picture. In the shoebox, underneath the letters, was a photograph. Joseph Chen, age 29, standing in front of the SS William Hooper 3 days before the sea trial that killed him. Chen was smiling. one hand raised in a wave, sunlight catching the welding goggles pushed up on his forehead. On the back of the photograph in Denham's handwriting, Joe Chen, best partner I ever had. Sparrows Point, February 1942. Denham looked at the photograph every time he opened the shoebox. Every time he read a letter from a historian or a veteran or a student learning about stress distribution, every time someone thanked him for saving lives, he'd look at Chen's smile and think, "You should have opened that garage, Joe. You should have had that life." In 1983, a few weeks before Denham died, Margaret asked him if he had any regrets about the war years. "Just one," he said. "I figured out the problem too late to save Chen. If I'd been smarter, faster, if I'd seen it earlier. Maybe he makes it home." "Bobby, you saved 1,000 lives." "Yeah, but I couldn't save the one that mattered most." Margaret held his hand. They sat in silence for a while. "Chen would be proud of you," she said finally. "Chen would have figured it out too, probably faster than me. He was the better welder." "Then you did it for both of you?" Denham thought about that, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess we did." When Robert Denham died in April 1983, his funeral was attended by 47 people, family, neighbors, a few old colleagues from the bridge projects. Thomas Whitmore flew in from Liverpool. Harrison Webb came down from Philadelphia. Dr. Elizabeth Keane drove up from Johns Hopkins. At the service, Whitmore stood and told the story of the SS Robert Morris and the voyage that should have killed him. He told the room about a Baltimore welder who'd broken the rules to save lives, who'd never asked for credit, who'd spent 40 years fixing lawnmowers in the same neighborhood where he grew up. "The world didn't know his name," Whitmore said, "but the sea did. Every Liberty ship that made it across carried a piece of Robert Denham. Every sailor who came home because he decided that square corners killed his friend, and he wasn't going to let them kill anyone else." After the service, Margaret gave Whitmore the shoebox. Inside were the letters, the Navy commendation, the photograph of Chen, and one other item. A small metal plate, maybe 4 inches square, with rounded corners and a 3-inch radius transition. The first test plate Denham had fabricated in April 1942, before he'd installed anything on the Thomas Paine. He'd kept it for 41 years. "Bobby would want you to have this," Margaret said. "You're the one who went looking for him." Whitmore donated the plate to the Liberty Ship Museum aboard the SS John W. Brown. It's displayed in a case near the engine room, next to a photograph of Chen and a photograph of Denham. The plaque reads, "Prototype reinforcement plate with rounded corners, fabricated by Robert Denham, Baltimore, April 1942. This design modification reduced Liberty ship hull failures by 89% and increased vessel speed by 31%. Estimated 801,200 lives saved. In memory of Joseph Chen, 1913-1942, and Robert Denham, 1908-1983. Partners who changed the war." Every year on the anniversary of the SS John W. Brown's restoration, the museum holds a small ceremony at the display. Veterans come if they're still alive. Families come. Maritime students come. Someone reads the names. Chen, Denham, Torres, Morrison. All the men who died in hull failures and all the men who lived because a welder rounded some corners. The ceremony lasts maybe 20 minutes. No speeches, no politicians, just names and the sound of water against the hull. Because some heroes don't get monuments, they get rounded corners on 2 698 ships. They get sons and daughters who exist because their fathers made it home. They get lawnmowers fixed in a workshop in Sparrows Point. They get a photograph in a museum case and a metal plate that changed the war. Robert Denham never wanted more than that, but he deserved more. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe that the quiet heroes deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, and tell us in the comments, do you have a family member who did something extraordinary without recognition? Did your grandfather serve in the Merchant Marine? Was your grandmother a shipyard worker? These stories disappear when we stop telling them. Thank you for keeping Robert Denham's memory alive. Thank you for remembering Joseph Chen. Thank you for caring about the men who rounded corners and saved the world.